So I got called in at the last minute to do this, which is fine. You know, I like doing stuff at the last minute. And I was going to do a bunch of research into UBI, but I haven't because I'm lazy. And I've spent the past couple of days trying to memorize some poems for a slam I'm doing tomorrow. So I'm just going to give you that set. And if you don't like it, well, tough. And hopefully I'll remember all my words. Valley full of broken concrete slabs, grass, council estates and dog shite. Born to working class parents of the old school, or do as I say and not as I do. Unspoken problem drinking and regular beatings. Parents fucked up and cruel and ignorant and self-fulfilling. I know what a beacon of hope the church was. A place to go, people to be with, the idea of unconditional love as salve, a reason to keep going through the grim and the dark. I'm thankful for that hope, that belief. She left home as soon as she could, out of that armpit, out of the country and away from her family, through one of the very few avenues available to the working classes back then. She joined the Navy. As she achieved escape velocity and became part of that new family, she learnt, she grew. She stopped going to church. Her faith became less a bonfire that kept her warm at night, a blaze pushing back the dark of life, more pilot light that kept her plumbing going, her central heating ticking over. She kept it to herself, that secret ember that made its home at the core of her being and let her briefly luminescent on occasion, brought colour to her cheeks. As she began to reproduce, this ember flared gently, quietly. Tangled up her firstborn by giving him the name of the first man ever, christened her offspring and initiated them into the Protestant long con. Me and my two sisters, who've got lovely Welsh names to contrast with my Jewish one. In Hebrew, Adam means earth, soil, or as I like to put it, my name is dirt. Because I take comforts in ironies and self-deprecation. Jesus Christ ain't got nothing on Oscar Wilde and Douglas Coupland, believe. This foundation didn't take, not with me, but my sister Megan at least identifies as Christian. I don't know why. Maybe she believes in God or something. It doesn't matter. This is not her story. It's not mine either. It's my mum's story. And in my mum's story, the teachings of Jesus Christ were a life jacket. Through the years that turned like milk. Through the agonies of living, the cruel tides of being. Through all of life's bullshit, my mum kept a firm grip on the teachings of Jesus. Thank you. Personal is political. It's more than just a feminist statement. Might be back in its birth roots in the experiences of women in their pre-1960s lives as they break their own backs, devoiding existences of agency under the weight of societal expectations and the male gaze, reflected and contorted for the expectations of their own. But ideas do not stay where you put them, and living things that make us their hosts and spread like diseases, mutating and meeting up to compare notes. The concept has come to mean so much more than the original context implied, has come to mean so much to so many, unfettered by concepts such as gender and race, to strike at the very core of what it means to be a human being. The personal is political. Tripping over our own feet, baying for another's blood. The personal is political. Can easily describe as a game we've made to tip scales and control ourselves, because deep down we all have a love of bondage, need the labyrinths we create in order to keep ourselves distracted, and perhaps some bunch of white guys got real fucking good at playing this game and living their lives and putting the wool over their own and others' eyes and convincing others to follow in their footsteps, that even as the games got more complex, individuals becoming couples, couples becoming families, families becoming communities, communities becoming societies, and societies giving way to the great clusterfuck of civilization. Despite all of this, they managed to keep the fact that these are all just games we've made away from the minds of many. I want to make damn sure we don't realize we can pull our own strings. Dwells deep in every cell like carbon dioxide awaiting release, hangs from our bones and spills out of our mouths whenever we speak, because the great beast has fingers plunged deep into every pie, because the great beast is the human condition itself. And despite our best efforts, we are all just living in the shadows of somebody else's imagination instead of sharing in the imaginations of each other. The personal is political. Even if you miss, it's got to be more rewarding than doing fuck all about it. Thank you. So, this place is called Fika's Sake. I don't know if you guys know, but Fika is a Swedish word that basically means a sit down and a chat and a coffee. And I think it's a very good model for what this night is essentially going to be. You know, we're going to have some, you know, very serious people getting up and talking about some very serious things that you know, it's of relevance to society at the moment, you know, and they're of great interest. But what I find with like conferences and stuff, they're very formal, they're all a bit uptight, and I'd like to think this is a bit more kind of loose and a bit more community based and a little less up its own ass. So hopefully, you know, that's what's going to happen today. You guys are all going to have to be part of it, because, you know, you're not just an audience consuming something, you're participants in this debate. So get in there, you know what I mean? Conservative Party welfare reform and austerity measures impact women, in particular single mothers. Sounds pretty cool. Published work has included Brexit commentary and feminist articles, but frankly, what writer doesn't have stuff on Brexit and, you know, feminism? I know I do. Previous talk on the role of the male gaze in social media. I've actually got a song about the male gaze. I won't bore you with it.
Stop using this to promote you.
Fuck you, man. This is what happens when you get me up on your nights, right?
Yeah.
You can try and control me, but it's not gonna happen. Right. Published work has included Brexit commentary and feminist articles. Previous talk on the role of the male gaze in social media relating particularly to empowering fitness hashtags and related images on Instagram. Please welcome to the microphone, Danny Porter.
I'm quite a low-paid, I am a low-paid creative freelancer, and I've also had a bullshit neoliberal job that was much more well-paid. So, you know, I understand the tensions between doing that to fit within the neoliberal system versus doing something that you might find much more worthwhile and certainly much more personally fulfilling. However, I think that discussion leaves out another really important factor and reason for a citizen's basic income, and that is just write my notes, I do know what it is, the role of unpaid care in society, the bulk of which, whether we like it or not, is carried out by women. So through my ongoing master's dissertation research, but also exploring the academic voices of political theorists such as Carol Pateman, who's based in America, and the late Elsa Mackay, who's based here in Glasgow, I think there's a very strong feminist case for a citizen's basic income. This is because our neoliberal system, which ignores unpaid care, or at least when it is unpaid, because it isn't commodified, creates a barrier to true gender equality, no matter how equal the playing field within the workplace. Many academics have put this in different ways, but one recent American academic, Nancy Fraser, recently put this in an interview. The gendered separation of social reproduction from economic production constitutes the principal institutional basis for women's subordination in capitalist societies. The current political climate, I think, unpaid care isn't just being ignored with austerity measures when unpaid care isn't seen to be provided privately by the family. It becomes morally wrong and therefore deserving of derision and financial punishment, and this is extremely worrying. Feminist discourse has long had tensions between liberating women within the workplace and finding achieving equality for women there versus how to manage caring responsibilities and separating the gender imbalance there. Understandably, economic freedom is a key driver for feminism, with many successes having been achieved. We are still not part of a gender equal society, however, and that, I believe, is at least partly due to women having to fit an economic system which is inherently male in its design. a market-first, work-first structure which assumes a male lifelong pattern of employment, and economic security, welfare and resultant social inclusion and citizenship all rest upon participation within this model. Some feminists are loath to interrogate the role of family and care too much, lest that push us further into gender stereotypes of male as breadwinner and female as carer. I certainly understand that argument. I don't want to fulfil that stereotype myself. However, the case remains that women do the bulk of unpaid care. And by care, I mean, obviously elder relatives, but in a lot of instances, I mean families and children. Far better, I think, for me, would be a system which equally recognises paid employment and unpaid care. And those who carry out the latter, irrespective of whether they're men or women, are given as much respect and as much cause for social inclusion. I believe a citizen's basic income would move us closer towards that. Presenting a feminist case for citizens' basic income on the basis that allows room for caring responsibilities is not to say that it is a solution inherently more beneficial for women than it is for men, that neoliberal economics is the only barrier to gender equality. I don't think it is. Or that all feminists believe that neoliberal economics is a barrier. Many don't. I want to look at the case for the basic income, however, as having the potential to reverse the marginalisation of care and instead gives due respect and equal citizenship to those who carry it out. Neoliberal feminists, for instance, Sheryl Sandberg and the view she propagated in Lean In, she has since actually amended much of the message of that book, but she discusses the glass ceiling, and that should be the focus, and how women should be able to break through the glass ceiling. Not only does it ignore other reasons why equal access to the labour market may be an issue, such as poverty and race, ignoring very real barriers for many people, it also does not account for those with caring responsibilities who may not be able to fully participate in the market or who might not want to. Putting all the emphasis on paid work as a solution to women's equality and freedom only serves to further marginalise women who do not participate in it. Under austerity, increasingly conditional welfare is also doing this. Which brings me on to my own research, which might seem a bit of a tangent, but I think it does tie in. Exploring, as you mentioned, thank you, the impact of welfare reform and austerity on women, and in particular, single mothers. And one consistent theme that emerges from initial assessment of social policy of both the coalition and Conservative government subsequently is how much the austerity cuts have been ideological in their design rather than financially driven. And the clearest way of looking at that is how much it's financially achieved, which the answer to that is not very much. The balance sheet has effectively stayed relatively the same. So when you're looking at the cuts and who's been impacted by it most, seeing which groups have been targeted, the ideological reasons behind it start to emerge. Loosely, in particular for the groups of people I'm looking at, this might be said to rest on two laurels. Try and stand on that. First, the fixation with the market, and second, with a nuclear family unit. The third actor in any welfare discussion, which obviously this talk is relating to, is the state. And through these ideological perspectives, the government want a minimal role for the state there. This causes issues for single mothers doubly. First is their reduced or limited access to the labour market, and the second is by not conforming to a two-parent family unit. Both these elements, which link together, they are single mothers being unable to pay privately for the care of their family. The result of this is they're increasingly punished, both morally and financially. This is reflected in social policy through a number of policies, directly or indirectly, but one such example, to give you one, is the lone parent obligation, which was actually created under the Labour government, which is that single parents have to look for work in exchange for their benefits. And under Labour, the stipulation was with a child or children at 12 plus. Since 2010, that's been reduced to first 7 years old and then 5 years old. And even more worryingly, I believe, the punishment, and punishment is the right word, for not complying has also increased. So If single parents don't conform to that, then their benefits will be frozen for up to 3 years. This completely ignores the logistical and financial difficulties of being able to access the labour market when you're a single carer of children. There's no counter policy or investment to say, okay, here's to help, here's something that can help, this is the way we get you, and it's all punishment. Research, in fact, undertaken by the Fawcett Society, a feminist lobby group, has showed that single mothers have lost out most under austerity measures since 2010. It's not just financial, it's moral too. Of course, they might feed into each other, which I believe they do. For example, David Cameron in 2011, after the riots in London and elsewhere in England, laid the blame squarely, I don't actually have the exact quote, I do somewhere, on welfare mothers. He said it was the fault of welfare mothers. Also, the conservative think tank, the Centre for Social Justice, initiated by Ian Duncan Smith, that great champion of social justice, focused on, yay, it's not too boring. Sorry if it is really boring. It's a dissertation, it's boring. Thank you. Sorry, where am I? Further, the language of the report, the language is really judgmental and really punitive and just horrible, actually, when thinking about what they say about single mothers, that they're responsible, basically, for societal breakdown. None of this rhetoric and policy attributes any consideration for unpaid care, to go back to the point of basic income. Creating instead a situation where families must be able to afford to pay for themselves privately. This either would be said through the participation in the marketplace, or, albeit tacit and unmentioned, through a paid breadwinner, unpaid carer model, which obviously has gendered implications, again unsaid. This does not create a situation primed for gender equality. Single mothers who do not conform to this are labelled welfare cheats, scroungers, responsible for societal breakdown, with absolutely no due care or attention to the work that they carry out that is unpaid. The ramifications for this are not just for poor single women, but for all women. It becomes a greater imperative to stay within a relationship, even if it's abusive, or even if it's just unhappy. Women with children can live on one income, if it is relatively high, but is that to reify the status of the rich mother? This leads us down a murky path where a discourse may emerge on who is allowed to parent. Instead, a citizen's basic income would allow us to move away from the neoliberal obsession that paid work is all, and help avoid the moral punishment for women who cannot or do not want to fit that system. It would need, therefore, to be one, and this was covered in the last event as well, it would, I believe, need to be large enough to not be welfare by another name. It would be, for genuine choice of how to live, and if raising a family as a single parent is one of those, then it makes that possible. It doesn't have to be either or. It doesn't have to be work or care. I don't want to make it seem like women have to be carers. They have to stay at home. They have to raise families. They shouldn't work. Work is the devil, etc. It's the choice. It's giving women the choice. They can do both. In fact, it would probably make doing both a lot easier because it's I'm a single mother, if that wasn't obvious. It is difficult to find flexible work, and things where you have to look after children as well. It's not easy. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there. Where am I? La la la. Rap a poem. I wish I could. Basic income simply gives women more choice. I've already said that, but it's a good point to reiterate actually, and I found it. Focusing on the glass ceiling for me is not the answer, as it limits the perspective, it limits who can access that. It's less about breaking the ceiling than changing the fucking building. Thank you. That's what I wear, which I also love. Where women may benefit from these measures, and this is my final point, don't worry, Where women may benefit, I think they also have to be involved in its design. My perspective is not a feminist one, simply just because it is better for women. I think women should also drive this. I'm especially concerned that vulnerable women, single mothers, those on the poverty line, those marginalised through disability or race or other reasons, get a voice. I would like to see the feminist perspective, not just as the goal, but as a driver of it. In terms of the long goal, or the potential long goal of a citizen's basic income, certainly from my perspective, where I sit politically, it may take us closer to a solution where capitalist neoliberal economics could be replaced with a system which is far more egalitarian for all genders and all people. We have to make sure that whatever new system may emerge is not another patriarchal one. Thank you.
Just to Jim, I'm really sorry, we're all sorry about Margot. I mean, she was a fantastic lady, and I had the pleasure of actually being in the Scottish Parliament. She bought me dinner, and we had a few chats about politics and policy. So thanks very much. What to say? We're all here because of the guaranteed basic income. But when you look at the guaranteed basic income, where it's actually been tried out, it was soundly rejected by 85% in Switzerland. And I think we have to look at why it was rejected. Now, I think there's qualities about the actual guaranteed basic income, but I think we have to look at it to see if how we would actually get it to be a working proposal. And I don't know if the actual current methodology of actually trying to get this as a policy is correct. And I'll come back to Milton Friedman in a minute, but I think we have to look at the Swiss model as impetus and as lessons, and why that didn't work, and why the Swiss actually voted against the guaranteed basic income. Basically what they were offering was £2,500 or Swiss dollars to every person in Switzerland. Now that means if you had no money, you were going to get £2,500, and if you were on £3 million or $3 million, you were going to get £2,500. Now that is a reverse poll tax. And our friend Tommy Sheridan, who was very active against the poll tax, was there because it was a regressive tax. It treated everybody the same. And unfortunately, the guaranteed basic income is a regressive benefit. And that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means we have to actually look at how it's presented and why it's presented in such a way and why the Swiss rejected them. Milton Friedman, in the I think it was probably 1980s, 1970s, came up with the negative income tax. Now in the UK, there's 4 bands of income tax. The basic income is between 11,000 and 43,000, 20% tax paid. The higher rate is between 43 and 150,000 pounds, 40% tax paid, and the additional rate is over 150,000 pounds. Now what Milton Friedman basically said was that you would actually get benefits based on your tax level, which makes more sense than actually having a guaranteed basic income that everybody gets the same. What's the point in somebody on a multi-million pound salary getting the same as somebody who's impoverished? People will ask where we'd actually start the level for the poorest, and I think we should start at the poorest. Well, we've already got a cap on benefits anyway, so we already know what the maximum amount of benefit somebody's going to get anyway, set down by the Conservative government, what they're going to get anyway. So what it would actually be, and I would say, because there's 4 tax brackets, I would say there was 8 subsections where the negative income tax would depreciate down the actual levels. So you would start out at where the benefit cap is just now, and then it would actually decrease segmentally based on the actual tax of the actual people who are actually going to claim it, which is everybody. Okay? You would have maybe a biometrics security measure so that we know that people are not being fraudulent on it. We've read biometrics are already used in airports, and they're already used throughout the world, and it's successfully used. This would prevent fraud on the actual system once it's actually set up. But what this would actually do is replace all the other benefits. Now, I went and, this is just off the BBC, and I don't think this is a comprehensive list of benefits. It wouldn't replace all of them, like we were discussing there. We would still have the people who were ill, we still have a sickness benefit over and above this. But I mean, really, we've got adult social care, attendance allowance, a bereavement allowance, bereavement payment, budget loans, carers allowance, child benefit, child tax credit, child trust funds, cold weather payments, community care, consistent. Oh my goodness, man, there must be millions spent actually in administration of all these separate benefits. The amount of money that's lost in just purely administrating these must be absolutely colossal. Council tax, crisis loan, disability living allowance, employment support allowance, funeral payments, guardians allowance, healthcare travel costs, health costs, health and pregnancy grant, health, oh my goodness, health start scheme, maternity allowance, mobile supplement, over 80 pension, pension credit, reduced earnings allowance, retirement allowance. My goodness, honestly, you would think that, and that's not it finished, guys. There's absolutely tons more. There is no requirement for that. All of that is just money that's given to us in dribs and drabs, depending on how the government feel that we should be spending it. That system is nearly done. We're nearly moving away from this. But the only way that the negative income tax, and I'm going to combine that with the guaranteed basic income because it's basically the same, the only difference is it's staggered, is the fact that we could get rid of all of that and that we could move into a system where the state is not telling us what we are actually spending, the money that we give them to actually give us back, what we're not spending on. You would be able to then use the guaranteed basic income or the negative income tax to purchase a property. You wouldn't have to rent. The banks could then know that you're going to get a stable income, so that would take the pressure off local housing authorities to actually build more houses, because you would have the right to actually build your own house or pay for a mortgage off this. So the homeless rate would go down. You would have the opportunity to not be required through getting housing benefit to rent and only rent. And I mean, the other things that were there are just basically money. Each one of those is just an ability to get money. When you've got the money, I think you are a better arbiter of where that money should be spent than the state is. Milton Friedman identified two groups. He identified the poor who were poor because of their situation, and he identified the poor that was going to be habitually poor because of certain limitations. Now, that second group, regardless of whatever provision you put in, they're going to be in that situation. Whether the person's an alcoholic, whether he drinks too much, that person, unless they get help, or maybe they've got a disability that they can't get help from, you won't be able to legislate for them. They would also get additional support through a sickness allowance. But the ones that are poor because of their circumstance, because of the ability to use the money, I mean, they could set up their own businesses from their specific amounts of money that they were actually getting in, rather than actually getting a house even. So they would come off the actual the unemployment, or you would have a reduced burden on the taxpayer as the actual the increase in their wealth and the reduction that they would actually have on the state's allowances that they would actually get. So you would, in time, and what actually failed in Switzerland was the ability that the taxpayer was going to be burdened to a greater extent. With this system and with the negative negative income tax, the reduction, because it's a reducing benefit, and the richer you get, the more that you would actually get the less you would actually be a burden on the taxpayer, means that you would actually have an opportunity to bring the taxpayer on board, and they would be more likely to support a negative income tax rather than a guaranteed basic income. So that's basically it. If there's any questions, guys, I'm quite happy to actually listen to.
What's your argument that you just want to call it something else?
No, the guaranteed basic income is a standard for everybody, regardless of how much money you're making. It's standard benefit. Okay, so say you get £1,000, everybody gets £1,000, regardless of how much money you're making. The negative income tax means that it's a staggered down the way, so the rich don't get as much as the poor would. So then it would be staggered in a way so that if, say for instance £1,000 for the poorest in society, they wanted to actually then do a job, they would make money on top of that. That would put them potentially in a higher bracket. Their actual maybe lose £200, but they would still be making more than they would do if they were actually getting £1,000 on the lowest bracket. So it would be a staggered downward progressional benefit rather than a continual a constant benefit for everybody.
Okay.
Right?
I'm also a bit curious about the language. You didn't call it a universal basic income.
No, it's called a negative income tax. Milton Friedman, if you go onto YouTube, you'll see Milton Friedman.
No, you were using a different term instead of universal basic income. What was it? Guaranteed basic income?
Guaranteed basic, universal, yeah.
Is there any particular reason you put
No.
It was interesting you're saying, you know, is it, for me, the radical credentials of citizens' basic income are not just economic but they're cultural as well, right? So it removes this competition, it sets us up for the business of citizenry, and that's really important, that discussion. So, you know, this, like, I know you're talking about sort of means testing it.
Well, it's not really means tested, it'll be based on the already existing income tax plans.
Yeah.
So it's not really means tested, but,
Right.
but are you telling me that
Well,
somebody
I think-
who's in a high salary should get something the same as the person in the low salary? It
What
doesn't
I'm
make
saying
sense.
is we can't, that's the point, we're trying to create a different conversation. So if we create a culture where everybody receives the same amount of money and then it ends that element of competition. For me, universal basic income or citizens' basic income, I think that language is important. I prefer citizens' basic income because the emphasis is on being a citizen. For me, that language is radical and it should be neutralised. So the idea that it also can create class consciousness, I'm all about that, right? Class consciousness, or consciousness, and then put it like class consciousness. So you instead it ends that competition where you have a.
But I understand, see everything you're just saying, but it still does not take away from the fact
I'm not
that
saying
you're going
it
to
does,
be you're
but
going to be paying a
it's
guy.
a cultural shift in the way we
Well,
think
let me
about
put it this way.
wealth and
I understand what you just
competition
said.
and how we need to contribute
I understand
to
you.
society as individuals,
I understand.
as citizens, as a collective.
I understand.
And that's important.
That-
That's symbolic.
see-
It's
see-
important.
Okay, you finished? That get rejected in Switzerland. I think it would get rejected. Well, listen, I'll let you. I get rejected in Switzerland. 85% rejected it. So it's not going to.
Well, that's interesting, but how is that in the context of here? I mean, it should be
It's the
very
same thing.
specific.
It's the same.
Well,
It's the,
Switzerland is not the same society as.
no, it might not be the same.
Or
But
areas, it's
but
Glasgow.
are you
Is
going
it?
to have a referendum on it? Are you going? How are you going to
Am I
actually?
going to have a
No,
referendum?
not you
This is
personally.
what this is.
Mhm.
It's discussions, but the symbolic principle of it is still an important one because it creates a cultural shift and a change in thinking.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Well, it's only important if it gets actually put through as legislation, and it might not get put through as legislation for principle.
I understand the discussion about feasibility, not to adapt the ideas that everyone has here about how to change society for hopefully having the better,
Yeah.
to be on a more sort of equal playing.
But it
The
would be
idea
more
of
equal
citizens'
though.
Basic income is not to fit a model of what people think that we should do. The reason I think that I'm here is to have a discussion so that people can see that it's more feasible, not
Yeah.
to say, oh, well, that's not going to pass.
I think it can be done differently, but I think there's going to have to be a realism in what's actually going to happen.
I think imagination.
No,
Realism.
well,
That's
okay,
a
well,
radical
so,
thing
okay,
that you
okay,
can identify.
okay, well, here's a practical thing. Are you going to give the same to a guy that's earning £3 million as you're going to do for somebody that's earning nothing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the thing is,
Hold on, one at a time.
Yes, you give everybody the same, because it's a universal basic income, it's part of being part of society.
Sure.
And then you tax the rich more, and you can have it all combined as part of one system. Richard Murphy is busy work. I don't like his that much because his system gets a bit complicated because he taxes families more, and then you have to prove that you're living together and stuff like that. But the basic idea of combining a basic income that everybody gets with a progressive tax system answers the problem of giving it to the rich. The problem with persuading people, I think you've got to do a small scale experiment in a place and show how it can work.
So you seem to be assuming that they rejected it in Switzerland because of that. Is that based on polling from there? Or that?
If you have a look at YouTube, they've actually given some actual examples of why. I mean, I've not been to Switzerland and conducted my own polling, so I understand. So I just thought I've not got a point of reference on why they've done it. The only thing I've done is seen what was actually on YouTube.
Yeah.
And they've actually made discussions on what the actual conclusion was after it was rejected. I think also you've got to you're going to increase the tax burden as well. So that's a potential downturn on why they weren't supporting it as well. Because to get that consistently, you would actually have to increase tax and the burden of tax would go up potentially to actually facilitate such a high guaranteed basic income.
Deborah?
What about the concept is it's been kind of talked about in several circles when it comes to universal income of high earners having the option to gift back their income?
I think that's a great point and I totally agree with that as well.
So if somebody earns enough that they are financially solid and they don't need the universal income, because the whole point of it is it's a leveller, it's something that brings everybody up to a basic level. You know, so if somebody earns £3 million, the concept is that they can gift that back and they can decide where it's gifted back, whether it's children's services, disabled people, health services or something like that. They can designate. I mean that's something that's been spoken about and covered countless times. But it should not be discounted for the very rich as well as for the very poor. It should be everybody. And the concept that you mentioned burden. Somebody who's not financially active, as in they're not working, they're receiving a benefit, either because they're disabled or because they have young children to care for or for various reasons, shouldn't ever be counted as a burden.
No, I don't think they're a burden.
Providing a service to the country.
No, I agree.
Because they're
agree.
Here, they're
Totally agree.
raising families, they're raising
Totally agree.
generation. And the benefits, especially if you look at the study in Manitoba, the benefits that came across the board were phenomenal for mental health. I mean, they're to say that somebody's a burden.
No, I don't think they're a burden. I didn't. If I said that, that was a slip of the tongue. That's not what I meant at all. No.
With all the economic jargon, maybe you've heard of the Laffer curve. So the Laffer curve is basically a curve which shows the more people that can be taxed, you know, the more wealthy they are, the more likely they are to hire accountants and have offshore havens. So if you're really saying this is going to make a difference and you can use, you know, Friedman's kind of terminology, I don't see how much of a difference it will make if we don't give them, say, £1,000 or £2,000 a month. I think they're always going to find ways to avoid paying this.
Although you talk about the rich.
Yeah.
Well, the rich is always going to have a greater opportunity to do that as well.
That much of a difference?
Because there's two things as well. If you're going to do accounting, it's very. Would you use that if it wasn't the guaranteed basic income? It was a level basic income, and you were giving them, say, we'll use the Swiss model, 2,500, just as you were doing the poor. Are you going to tax that person? They have to then give it, and then they get it back. I mean, there's an incorporation. It's a bureaucratic process.
I think to start it off, you know, maybe we need to get female in position of power. We're talking about this in the context of a neoliberal ideology in the media. So in the media, you kind of see workers being scroungers.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
No, no. We see that in the media. Maybe this is in Switzerland as well. Is that to get benefit, you're a scrounger because you haven't got that kind of.
No, I think the thing with the negative income tax and the guaranteed basic income is that if you are a taxpayer, you're going to it's going to be you're going to have a greater likelihood of actually voting for something that's not going to increase your tax burden. If it's 2,500, you might, depending on, obviously, I've not done the maths, and this would have to be done, but this could increase the actual tax burden on the individual. And that's maybe why it might be rejected, whereas the negative income tax might actually be acceptable. So, I mean, we're all looking at the same thing. I'm just looking at a slightly different take to actually get something that I agree with what the rest of you said. The only different take would be that it would be staggered in a progressive manner.
Part of like the whole idea around the citizens' basic income is it removes the stigma of receiving benefits.
But everybody's still going to do a negative basic income as well.
See if you're staggering people, so the people that don't have an income are receiving more. These people, it's not going to change the
Well, everybody's going to be receiving it anyway, even in negative, even in this, so it doesn't really matter. All it's going to be is staggered, it's going to be progressive. Well, as I said, the benefit. Okay, there's going to be a staggered benefit, but there's still going to be a benefit to everybody. So it's not going to be in a manner that nobody's going to get it. So somebody's going to be stigmatised. It's going to be an amount of money for everybody, and not just for the rich, or not just a universal benefit. So it'll be staggered, but everybody will get it.
In this sense, how are you going to prevent people who might not have a job at the moment, but would be able to take on a part-time job, for example, but that would not give them any sort of benefit in general? How would
Would they getting paid for this part-time job?
Yes.
Right, okay. So it would increase their return. So they get the basic income, and they would also get the salary from the part-time job. That then would actually progressively move them up. The actual benefits change, so they would increase their salary, and the actual reduction on the actual universal benefit would happen as well. So it would be staggered, but it would be deliberately staggered so that the more they're getting, they're still receiving the benefit, but it's just staggered. You know, I'm getting major problems with universal benefits. I think I understand the argument for the stigma, but it seems pointless somebody who's very rich getting the same as somebody that's very poor.
Okay, this song is about not taking shit from people, and it's called You're Not the Reason. You are not the reason I lie awake at night. No, you are not the reason, though I think it's what you'd like. Do you take me for a fool or a decent conversation? I lie awake at night and you are not the reason. Oh, it's all fun and it's all games. It's just another stupid way to say I need affection. Oh, I need affection, and even if my skin turned green, you'd never see my jealousy. We can't defy gravity, cause it's what keeps us down. Yeah, it's what keeps us down. You are not the reason I lie awake at night. No, you are not the reason, though I think it's what you'd like. Do you take me for a fool or a decent conversation? I lie awake at night, and you are not the reason. No, you are not the reason. It's saying it's goodbye. You've got to laugh sometimes, my dear, just laugh or you will cry. I need a shot of vodka and a good night's sleep, but mostly I need something to PG-12 my dreams. Oh, and I lie awake at night. You don't plague my thoughts, it's more a hey, that is the side of the bed that I don't frequent much. Do you take me for a fool or a decent conversation? I lie awake at night, and you are not the reason. No, you are not the reason. Somebody told me if I close my eyes, that reality would be eaten alive. It would scream in the stars, begging for mercy. It would go down in flames and beg for some mercy. Oh shit. Go down in flames and beg for some mercy. 'Cause late at night when the children are sleeping, when the dark beckons out, 'cause God isn't listening. When the people you care, who you call your friends, will be down on the ground willing it all to end. They'll be down on the ground willing it all to end. I missed you like a city misses hurricanes. We didn't start the revolution in your bed, but we caused confusion inside your head. But we didn't start the revolution in your bed. It's not a revolution if people aren't losing their heads. city misses hurricanes. I miss you like your city misses hurricanes. We didn't start the revolution in your bed, but we caused confusion inside your head. And we didn't start the revolution in your bed. It's not a revolution if people aren't losing their heads. People aren't losing their heads. I miss you like your city misses hurricanes. 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 I am looking right instead of left, cause what I can't see cannot hurt me. It's the time of the night where I'm tired and lonely, can't shatter the glass even though I can't breathe. I guess I'm not trying, I guess I am lying to myself and everyone in front of me. God knows this ain't my finest hour, but everybody's got their problems with power. Everybody's got their problems with power. Everybody's got their problems with power. These cigarettes we smoke, they taste like cancer on my lips. Maybe all my problems would be solved if I pulled myself in at the hips. If my legs were taller and my body smaller, I'd be fighting with the rest. God knows this ain't my finest hour, but everybody's got their problems with power. Everybody's got their problems with power. Everybody's got their problems with power. Everything I let go gently. If I drop too hard or drop too fast, another shock will surely kill me. Their names are everywhere you look, and I have never been so angry. God knows this ain't my finest hour, but everybody's got their problems with power. Everybody's got their problems with power. Everybody's got their problems with power. When the ego is tempted, the it becomes reckless, and I feel objected a lot of the time. It's a name on a tongue and it don't taste like love. Tastes like forgetting my integrity, but I'm still standing and they are still laughing. Although all these laughs sound like mocking to me. God knows this ain't my finest hour, but everybody's got their problems with power. Everybody's got their problems with power. Everybody's got their problems with power. Da 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 da. Everybody's got their problems with power. Everybody's got their problems with power. Everybody's got their problems with power. Everybody's got their problems with power.
Like Paul said, my name is Bibi. I'm a poet and I'm also a postgraduate student, and I like to sort of incorporate both of them, which is what I'll be trying to do tonight as well. I research things like racism, sexism, classism, ableism, and basically all the isms out there, including capitalism. And I spend a lot of time looking at the mechanisms behind inequality, so behind all these different kinds of inequalities, sort of looking at what the common denominator is between them, sort of like meta inequality. I think that sounds kind of cool, so that's going to be my new research title. And the thing that all of these things have in common, all of these inequalities, is that they are defined by our conception of humanity, of normalcy, and of human value. So these are the things I kind of look at in my research. Looking at inequality means looking at the intersection of who we deem valuable in society and the ramification it has to be considered unvaluable. Invaluable? What's the English word for it? Invaluable. Thank you. I'm not a native speaker, for anyone who hasn't noticed, so it's really nice when people chime in with the right words. So these ramifications include things like violence, discrimination, and one of the biggest ones is economic ramifications, which is obviously what we're here to talk about tonight as well. Now, my knowledge of economics is actually fairly basic, so I won't be going into that specifically. I'm looking at the other side of it. So things like, what are the social aspects to this? What do we consider like human value? All that kind of stuff. And I think we can all agree that in one way or another, money plays a really big role in our lives and in society, and that this is felt hardest by those who suffer from a lack of money. Now, I recently read an article on the value of human life, the actual value, the monetary value. And this was estimated between 7 to 9 million US dollars. Now, I'm gonna sort of take a moment to like look at the weirdness of that sentence, that the value of human life is estimated between 7 to 9 million US dollars. And this estimate was based on research by insurance companies and different departments within the US government. So obviously it's going to be a conservative estimate since neither of those institutions value human life that highly to begin with. But what struck me the most is that the worth of a human body, based on all the internal organs and all that, and the cost of those, lies somewhere around 45 million US dollars. So that's 7 to 9 million for human life and 45 million for a human body. The quick conclusion from this is that humans are estimated worth more dead than alive, that somehow whatever makes us human, our humanity, subtracts value from our physical corpse. And if that isn't sort of capitalism summed up in one sentence, then I don't know what is. So, because money is set into things such as health, lifestyle, happiness, all that, we have created this direct correlation between society's biased moral judgment and if and how people survive. Where we have a justice system that is sort of idealistically based on eliminating bias, on fairness and equal judgment, our society condemns people at random to a life of poverty and hardship without questioning it, unlike we are doing here, which is very good that we're doing that here. So one of the solutions to that, and which I believe is a very good solution to that, is citizens' basic income, but I don't have all the answers. And that's not a disclaimer, that's a way of reclaiming my right to remain silent on violence that I don't encounter and things that I don't have any sight on. We distinguish between the good and the bad, but there's more nuance than that, and even if I tried, I could not outline this all on my own, but here's what I know. They're titled by virtue of being indifferent to the rights of those they share this earth with, the doomed. We're divided by any difference, every opportunity taken to benefit from their persistent inability to listen to rules they did not know, and if you've listened, it's not hard to understand who created the system. We have the mighty who misused an advantage in timing and technology to advance their grasp on the world with violence and mythology. Created a divine power to rule, a way of being cruel by the rules, a way of creating same and other chosen or unfettered riches, or dirt poor bastard, from a religious intervention to a financial timestamp on a history we try not to remember, and beyond that. We have the ways of these folk to roam beyond borders of their own, of subjecting the world to a system that's inherently indifferent to anyone not within its holy chamber, whether it be by divine intervention or by political games that are played with the riches in mind. And we justify these by placing ourselves left and right of demanding rights from people that should not have the power to give or take anyway. What it comes down to is this. Our world works in ways determined by the flow of what we deem worthy. The flow of money comes freely into white hands in walled worlds, but the flow of people who come to knock on doors within these walls is restricted by virtue of them being other. There is no doubt that we extort those we can frame as being too far away for our care to cover. As we create imaginary borders of should and should not be granted the full status of human, our minds indoctrinated with images of black bodies who travel worldwide post-mortem while we sense in white pain and demise. We let ourselves believe that we need to deserve humanity, that we need to deserve the right to live as we are raised in places that have long since lost away out of 9 to 5, as we can no longer learn to provide for ourselves with ease within these cities. It's all about dignity. The myth of raising yourself up by hard work instead of accepting it's down to luck is pervasive as millions of people who have no way of raising anyone without pain wonder, what did I do to deserve this? Rather than, why do we not frame riches as violence in a society where people die in poverty every day, whether through famine or lack of resources for those who carve themselves out to be light enough to float away from this injustice? We are told lazy is a sin. Lazy is a thing that people are. You are lazy. You are unworthy of being alive. If you don't get up in the morning, if you can't get yourself up in the morning, you are a burden. You deserve to die if you are not a productive human being. And even with the prospect of machines to do our jobs, you cannot accept that productivity isn't the be-all and end-all, that human value cannot be determined in cost, that even if you do not get out of bed some mornings, productivity comes in many forms. But we cannot revolutionize the system if we keep basing worth on who is best at upholding values determined by the way the cocks turn. We all do our work. And I would rather see everyone earn a living by being alive than being your faith that people don't carry their weight when all I want to do is alleviate us all from our burden. I don't have all the answers. It's not a disclaimer, it's a way of reclaiming the right to listen rather than speak whenever I feel I need to be heard on an issue. We all share a world. But our experiences cover an ever-expanding universe, and I would like to count the stars, so recount to me the things you've seen. Let's share ideas without the need to pretend we know we're right. Nurture is necessary in this culture that's been torn apart by individual burdens. There is so much to learn, and so many ways to fight without violence. Cheers.
I am about to say is untrue, then you've got nothing to worry about. But if what I've got to say is actually true, then everybody in here, with the exception of myself and my age group, have one hell of a lot to be anxious about and to be challenged about. One of the things that Marx said was that if you change the base, the economic base of an economy, then the social superstructure that is on top of it will also change. And I think he was quite right. So far in this discussion and debate, we've been talking about the world that is. That world that is going to disappear, and fairly rapidly in your lifetime. And it's going to bring challenges to people's ideas and ideologies which are not present in the arguments that obtain in our society at the present time. I have been 55 years in public and political life, and I discovered that there's a truism that people demand from politicians that they tell the truth. Well, actually, that's only up to a point, believe you me. My experience is that most people like the truth that they like, but they don't like the truth that they don't like. And in the course of the last couple of years, when I've been addressing audiences on referenda and all the rest of it, I have deliberately raised the issue of what is going to happen in our world when the robotic revolution really takes hold. And on each occasion, I'm experienced enough to know that the audience didn't like it. In fact, I can take you way back to 1992, when I was fighting an election in Govan. And there was 700 people in Pennylee, in a big in the Catholic Hall. And we were all asked about the economy. And I got up and explained that for the last 300-400 years, the Atlantic axis of the east coast of America and Europe had dominated the world economically, politically, diplomatically, and militarily. But that was an era that was going, and we were now into the next century of the Asia Pacific, which would pose us with a considerable number of difficulties and adjustments, as rising powers there became a significant factor in the global economy. My opponent, who actually won, Ian Davidson, got up and said it was all right listening to Jim and all that talk about the Asia Pacific. All we needed on Thursday was a Labour government to wild applause, because that was the magic pill. Much easier to swallow than somebody saying, look, the world is changing. So what I'm going to talk about is the new world economic order that's coming in and the new society that's likely to be built upon it. The robot revolution has hardly touched our society at the present time. It's touched it in terms of people understanding and talking about it. Columnists have written about it. The Guardian on Thursday had a debate, full-page debate, among people in the artificial intelligence community. But the political parties, and at the end of the day, it's going to be political decisions that are going to matter. There's hardly a blip on that political spectrum of any understanding. With one exception, to be fair to them, members of the European Parliament have had a look at this, and they've been talking about UBI as being one of the consequences that must come in. But we've had a Tory conference, we've had a Labour Party conference, and we've had an SNP conference, and we haven't had one word about the robotic revolution that is in fact underway. And I can give you fairly local examples. That new hospital that they named after the lady down in Buckingham Palace It's got 24 robot porters instead of 24 human beings. The Forth Valley Hospital that was built, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, actually the whole of the pharmacy is robots. They've saved something like £700,000 a year in their budget. They claim that the pharmacy is much more efficient under robotics than it was under human beings. In China, a company which manufactures very, very intensely small items for our mobile phones has just dispersed with 90% of its workforce, because robots will work not 24 hours a day because they need recharge, but about 18 hours a day, don't need to go to the toilet, don't need coffee breaks, don't need paid holidays. And this is not scare talks on my part. A guy from America called Scott Gourley, who has led the fight for $15 minimum wage, or whatever they like to call it in America. And he got a standing ovation, and it was a brilliant speech. He never mentioned the possibility of what might happen if artificial intelligence is applied among those jobs in America where he's fighting for the $15 minimum. You'll not believe this, but there is actually an organisation in America called Momentum. They've got a robot that can make a perfect burger, all the toppings, sliced, placed and cooked in less than half the time it takes a human being. And the whole purpose of the company is to sell to the likes of McDonald's a device which is meant to completely remove humans from the process of the company. That's been happening back here. Where on the political field have we heard anything about it at all? This is what the new Chancellor of the Exchequer said to the Tory party conference. I quote, "Driverless cars, graphene, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, virtual reality, advanced robotics. I'll be honest with you, I had no idea until a few weeks ago just how much I didn't know." This is the guy who's in charge of the economy. He'd never heard of robotics and artificial intelligence and 3D printing, and he's not a fool. He's an extremely well-educated individual. Andy Haldane, who's the chief economist of the Bank of England, asked to meet the TUC last November. And you'll find his paper on the web, and I tell you, it is well worth reading. His estimate of the loss of jobs in the UK, which he describes as being hollowed out by artificial intelligence, is 15 million out of the 31 million we have at the present time. He reckons that in America that would equate to 80 million jobs lost. And he points out that the owners of present technology have what he called the whip hand over workers. Now, that whip hand, and a quote from him, shows that because of that influence of technology, had US real wages tracked productivity since 1970, the median worker today would be 40% better off. And in the United Kingdom, would actually be 20% better off. A friend of mine in the socialist movement, Alan Croghan, has actually done work on this. And he's pointed out that in the United States of America, in 1998, 194 billion hours of labour were applied. 15 years later, with 42% increase in output, is the same 194 billion hours of labour. Now, that's, I believe, is what is coming to my granddaughter's generation and folk in here in their generations. MIT have done quite a bit of work on this as well, and to be fair to the academic community, there's been a great deal of work done on the social consequences of the development of artificial intelligence. And MIT, one of its papers says, who's to own the robots? Now, I'm a socialist, and my first reaction would be public ownership. Then I thought about it, because one of the things I was taught in the Ayrshire labour movement was intellectual rigour, that we were not allowed to get away with flabby thinking. We were required to think through an issue. And so I thought, well, yeah, I'm for public ownership of this new technology. But such as the development of the technologies, that if we took ownership of, let's say, public technology A, by the time we had got it, somebody else would have made something better and superseded it. And if we went for them, somebody else would have superseded that as well. Rather like trying to step 3 times onto the same spot in a moving river. So the notions that I had, that I was brought up on, in a sense still have inside my head, probably won't work. The changes in the structure of our economies since the 1970s have seen trade union membership drop from 13 million to just over 6.5 million, where the biggest proportion of that is in the public sector, where it's relatively easy to organise as a trade union. In the 1970s, we had great big static industries like steel, shipbuilding, coal mining, railways, where you had lots of workers together, where you got a communal attitude, but with them going and a new kind of service industry coming in where the balance tilted, it has become much more difficult for the trade union movement to organise in shoe shops and McDonald's and places like that. So we have to look in the future for, we've got to use our imagination, get out of some of the old orthodoxies and think anew and act anew, because we're going into new circumstances completely. That's where I believe you will require a strong state. Even if we can't own the robots, the crucial thing is, can we own the wealth that they actually produce? Because that's going to be the key question. If you own the wealth, you can determine how the wealth is in fact distributed. But if you think about it, I know that technology creates jobs that we can't even think of at the moment. But the general view among the artificial intelligence community at the moment is that this is going to be different from last time. They're going to destroy more jobs than they actually create. And I've told you about, making up a hamburger. Don't think it's only the unskilled and semi-skilled whose jobs are going to be at stake. It's going to be accountants, it's going to be lawyers, it's actually going to be journalists as well, because it's already been proved that a robot can actually turn out about 90% of a journalist's work, especially just now. In America, one of the big litigation lawyers groups, who would go through thousands and thousands of documents in a big litigation case, would normally have 2 lawyers and 5 paralegals. One big company has done away with them all, and robots actually do the necessary digging among that. Driverless cars, it's a sort of fancy thing at the moment. 10% of the American workforce are drivers. Driverless trucks, driverless cars, may work. So the question really is, to our society, which is, I think, is coming. How do we get money into people's pockets who will never actually have a job? We're not, because we're talking about some, like, you know, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50% of what we would regard as unemployment. Somebody mentioned culture earlier. There is a cultural factor in this. I may be wrong, but it seems to me that ever since Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, that for most people, work has been central to their personality. We sort of define ourselves. You know, what are you? I'm a fireman. You know, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, or something like that. It's all right, people saying you'll have massive leisure time. But what happens to human society if that leisure time actually isn't enough and you've lost this central fact of your personality that you've got to earn your own living for your own self-respect? So we're going to be faced, if I'm correct, and it's not just me, by the way, I'm copying from what academics are writing and saying and what has been happening. How do we put money into people's pockets who will never find a job, or who might find themselves in work and then out of work permanently? Well, the only way I can think of doing it is by the UBI. I can't think of any other way. That then lends itself to the question, at what level? Well, again, my friend Alan Croghan has done work on that. And he reckons that if you gave everybody over 16 £10,000 a year, that would cost 400 billion to the Treasury. Now, one of the things the left never really likes to admit that is true is that governments ain't got no money. Governments only have the money that they get from the taxpayer. Now, at the moment, the income next year is going to be around about 761 billion. 400 billion off of that, even if it's saved on the administration of a welfare system, is a huge chunk of money. But £10,000 a year for everybody over 16 isn't a fortune. You know, really, 3 times to Malaga, I don't think so. If you say, well, we have to get an adequate income where people aren't struggling, where they have the chance of a decent life, then do you pay the average wage at the moment, which is 26,500 a year? But if 10,000 takes away more than half of the present government income, then if you pay 26,500, they've no money for anything else. Now, that is where I come to the question of intellectual rigour. That's the kind of thing we've got to face if we're going to argue for a UBI that is in fact effective in the world I think is now unfolding before us. I start backwards. I would start by saying this is the level we need, and then you work out the taxation policy that is required to provide that. And that's not going to be easy in this artificial intelligence world, because we already know, even in things like coffee, that these organisations are external to the economy, as far as tax is concerned, to the economy in which they make their profits. So we've got to work on how you make them actually pay the tax on the profits they earn inside our own economy. Then you've another problem. Somebody earning 200,000 quid a year, do you pay him or her 26,500? Well, you can, because you can take that back in taxation. You don't need to do a means test, except say that everybody over, say, £150,000 a year, actually what they get from UBI is taxable. And the principle's already there. My state pension is actually taxable. Many pensioners don't pay it. But if you ally my state pension to the private pension that I got from my last company, then I'm into the taxation level and it's clawed back off me. That's the kind of problems that we have to start tackling now. And really, it's very interesting that we are here in Glasgow tonight in a sort of informal way talking about something in which our political leaders apparently are in total ignorance of. But frankly, I don't see any point in arguing for a UBI that is not at a level that can provide people with a decent life. We live at the moment in an indecent society where we've got food banks, we've got people starving, we've got people sanctioned. That's an indecent society. If we cannot come with policies and with ideas that are properly worked through in the future, and it's still the case that a small minority owns the technology to come, then this will become an even more indecent society. And that's the challenge that's before us at the present time. Now, I'm quite happy to take questions. I think that's where the importance of a very strong state comes in, because that's the one instrument that can be used coercively to get the necessary taxation in order to make sure that people are paid a UBI at a proper level. I think the left has to be able to argue for a stronger state, because the trade union, how does the trade union movement organise? I know of one big car making company in the northeast of England where one part there's 100 robots and 5 people in the maintenance. It's quite difficult if you've got an owner as a employer to actually get those 5 people into a trade union. And I don't have an answer. The only answer I've got is to say to folk like yourself in the trade union movement, time to start thinking. And we've got to think outside of the things that formed my life, which was the Industrial Revolution society, where you could go to the steel mills, you could go to the pits, and you get 95, 98% of union membership, because you could sell that. But that's not the case now. And I think the trade union movement really needs a kind of general staff that and research departments that can think outside the present box. Now, Andy Haldane, took the trouble to ask to meet the TUC, and you really look up his paper on the web. It's a fascinating paper, and it's not anti-trade union by any manner of means or anti-worker. He's very concerned about it, and yet we've heard nothing from the TUC. I mean, we've had a trade union congress, and there's absolutely nothing going there as well. It's a tremendous worry to somebody like me. I'm at the end of my sort of political public career, and I know it'll not affect me. Maybe I'll get a robot to wheel me around when 10 years time, something like that, instead of my stepdaughter doing it. That's I think probably my stepdaughter rather than my stepsons, as it were. But we have to start thinking, really. And unless we wake up to what's going to happen, the same thing will happen to the working people as happened in the Industrial Revolution, where it was hell. I mean, if you look at what happened to working class folk in the Industrial Revolution, it was typhoid, measles, diphtheria, short life, absolute hell upon earth for many people. Slums in Glasgow you would hardly believe if you actually ever had seen them in your lifetime. That will happen to us again if we can't put our thinking cap off. But strong state is even more important than what would be a strong trade union.
From your experience as an MP, do things like UBI have to be initiated through the government, and if so, how do we here tonight help to push that forward?
Politicians find it very difficult. I mean, I don't believe that some of them don't know about it. That can't possibly be true. But this is a very hard one to tackle. And we have a political elite, a political class, both in Scotland and the UK at the present time, who don't really have any great experience of life, and who are in politics for political careers. And they're actually short-term political careers if you think about it. Because if you postpone something today that should be done, nobody will ever know, because you'll be dead and gone by the time folks say they should have done something about that. I think it's got to come from organisations like this, you know, from meetings like this, and people going back to their organisations and saying, hey, there's a problem coming, we better start ourselves, start to argue on policy and try and work out ourselves policy at the draft stage, and then haul in the politicians and say, this is what we want. Now there, the trade unions have a significant role, because you know they can haul in the politicians, but so have other people and other organisations as well. I think that's what you've got to do. I think they won't, and then when they're forced, they'll do it in panic, and it'll be sticking plasters, not the kind of fundamental UBI that I think we require.
And back to what I was discussing as well, will it make it more affordable and thereby more of a possibility if there is the negative income tax rather than is that going to reduce the overall cost of the actual thing and thereby making it implementable?
Well, one of my problems with doing it in the taxation system is that all recent history showed you can do anything you almost like with it. Whereas if you've got a UBI, the UBI is it, and nobody can actually, you know, work their way around it. I'm not sure that tinkering around or even fundamentally trying to alter the present taxation system will in fact deliver the necessary level of income that UBI would deliver.
What role do you think could be played by wealth tax as distinct from income tax?
This is why I said you start with the level of UBI that you want, and then you work out the taxation system in order to deliver it. And if that includes a wealth tax, hunky-dory as far as I'm concerned. But I'm also well aware of the kind of world we live in and how difficult it might be on occasion to actually identify the wealth that you can actually tax. It's well, you know, well, land is a very good one, but there are, you know, there's lots of folk with a lot of wealth which they've got planted offshore, and a lot of wealth created. You know, wealth isn't a static thing. You know, we actually consume wealth on a day-to-day basis in this world, and we create new wealth to take its place or increase the wealth. And it's how you tackle that wealth and ensure that that's a fair society. I don't have, you know, the final draft. I've got the first draft which identifies where the problem is coming from, what it will do to individuals, raises some cultural questions, tries to set the idea that you set the level first and then you try and work out what the taxation is to support it. There's a hell of a lot of work got to be done on this, and I may tell you in my view very, very quickly, particularly by people on the left. My main concern with a proper level UBI is that people have a decent financial standard of living. But that doesn't solve the problem. I mean, you said it, you know, we could suddenly theoretically get to a position where human beings didn't need to do anything at all. There are a number of people, there's a professor at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem has raised the fundamental questions. Is that going to be good for a human being? Now, I can say, well, I'm retired now, great, I can read. It's fine, I can go and play golf. Yeah. But when I was 35, and we already have some experience in the deprived areas in England and Scotland of what happens to people when they've got nothing to do. Well, let me tell you a wee tale. When I was the MP for Govan, a man came to see me and said that his son had been treated unfairly in the YTS system. A small company, probably about 20 or 30 workers. And he says to me, he said, the boy came in, he says, and I interviewed him, and I said, fine son. Now, you start, you know, Monday morning here at 7:30. He says, Monday morning came, he didn't turn up. He came in at 9 o'clock. And I said to him, look son, you start your work in here at 7:30. Don't you effing talk to me like that, said the boy, and walked out. And the employer was really quite angry. He started trying to help him. Then he said, then I realised, he said, that boy had come from a family where nobody for 3 generations had worked. And the idea of getting up to go to your work in the morning, I mean, it didn't matter to him whether he came at 7:30 or 9. And he said, you know, there's you and I said to me, when we started work, we didn't even realise it, but we were imbibing a sort of social discipline in society. I did what the foreman plasterer told me, or, you know, I was in trouble. I said, but that boy hasn't been subject to that. You can go to the club and you can chat, you can have a couple of, you can't keep doing that. So I think there are, you know, there's significant problems that particularly the academic community can help us with, but it's not just a matter of money, I'm sure of that. Oh, I don't think the state at the present time is going to be in control of this in any way whatsoever. I think they're going to be overwhelmed by it. There are some technologies, obviously, that could go into public ownership, as it were, and be developed from there on. But in the kind of world we're living in, and the kind of productive base that we have at the present time, both manufacturing and particularly servicing, I think it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to say public ownership per se is going to be the answer all the way through. So my emphasis on the strong state is on owning the wealth that is created through taxation. I mean, that's the critical thing for me, and I can't see any other instrument that can actually do that. Because you can't, I think you need a UBI rather than individual bargaining going on in half a dozen folk looking after 100 robots. Very difficult to actually organise on that basis. But look, I could be wrong, let me tell you. I mean, part of preaching intellectual rigour has got to be the ability to say, I might be wrong. My view of the world is that I'm sceptical of all isms, including my own socialism. And I think that would be a very good philosophical attitude for everybody to actually adopt.
Serious question though, because if the automation of things is going to mean that a lot of people, and especially working class people, will be laid off, and how you want to sort of counter that is by essentially giving people financial subsidy for everybody. But the proliferation of technology and the fact that technology is reaching a point where it can start to self-repair and it's reaching the singularity means that if government implemented things that the cost of living is going to dramatically decrease. And government, you know, replacing, whether it's something like nationalisation of railways would be made a lot easier if everything was automated. You know, nationalisation of public transport, things like that, or hospitals, police, whatever. How much of that would sort of, it would mean that government would cost a hell of a lot less to begin with. It would mean that the cost of living, also the fact that people are having access to these technologies too. You still have to have people producing and earning in order to tax them to give the money back. So it's, because I'm like where I'm at with UBI at the moment is I'm fairly in support of it, but I also see other ways in which this technological revolution could aid people without just giving people money, because you've also got a lot of people aren't good with money. A lot of people are going to make very poor financial decisions if just given money. Some people will make very good financial decisions if just given money, but there's that issue as well, as you said, the cultural issue, which it doesn't tackle.
Well,
I don't know if there was a question in that.
No. I think there will be certain aspects of what we call the government admin that will be done by artificial intelligence. I don't have any doubt about that. It's when you reach the highest levels of policy making in society, I think that's when we have to say, no, that strata is the human factor. You know, we make the decisions because we're making the decisions. No, actually, we're making the decisions for human beings. The European Parliament Committee is actually having a look at giving the robots rights. My contribution is a first draft. That's all it is. But just to signal what I think is going to happen and the need therefore to have a second draft, third draft, fourth draft, as you know, people bring their brains on it. And by the way, you know, the job losses are going to be right across the board. There was an experiment done about 3 or 4 months ago with a robotic surgeon and a highly trained surgeon. Both did experimental work, surgical work on a pig, 1 pig each, and the robot was better. And then you've had that artificial intelligence, you know, the Go game in China, which is about 20 times more difficult, if not more, than chess. The artificial intelligence actually beat the world champion. So the problems that we as a human society have to face are quite immense in my view, and they go into the very deep cultural areas as well as the economic ones.
Of a sort of laissez-faire government style, because there's right-wing rationale for UBI as well, whereupon there's 10 grand, buy your own prescriptions, pay for your own kids' school. Could it lead to sort of a right-wing?
Oh yes, of course it could.
Could it be misused?
Oh yes, yes. I mean, there's been no human invention, either mechanical or any other kind, including policy, that that hasn't been misused as well as used. And so there's an ideological aspect to it as well. And I'm highly critical of the left, of which I am a member. I think the left has failed intellectually over the last 20 to 25 years. And that unless the left really wakes up to its own flaws, then we'll be beaten, because 2 of the newspapers I read, one is The Spectator and the other is The Daily Telegraph. Now I read them because I want to find out what the other side actually think. And let me tell you, there are some very bright people on the right. You know, very, very bright people. And we will have to, on the left, win the intellectual high ground if the robotic revolution is going to redound to the benefit of humanity and not to the benefit of a laissez-faire economic system. Okay? Well, thank you very much.
That was actually great.
So firstly, just to start by explaining what the Better Than Zero campaign is. Basically, as we all know, the trade union movement is in a pretty dire situation at the moment in terms of not just the actual membership, but the fact that there's very, very little young members involved in the trade union movement, either as members or activists, and the workplace has changed. The workplace is no longer the big factories, there's no longer a massive public sector full of union members, and we have massive precarious work. And precarious work means anybody on 0-hour contracts, low wages, minimum wage, 0 wages sometimes, false self-employed contracts, basically people who don't really know how much money they're going to get at the end of the month, end of the week, and they're treated with little or absolutely no respect in the workplace. And it's those kind of workplaces that we're seeing increasing at the moment in society that the unions haven't managed to tap into yet. Now, what do we mean by unions? What's the point in being in a union? Maybe we all know here, I don't know, but basically it's about collective strength in your workplace. Now, what Jim's just said obviously is true. All of these precarious industries that we are seeing a massive increase in at the moment are probably actually going to be gone in the next 20 years or less than that because of automation. So I'll tell you first of all about Better Than Zero. It's a Scottish TUC funded campaign, which basically is for any young person in precarious industries like hospitality mainly, to get them involved in actually trying to organise something in their workplace, to stand up for themselves in work, to stand up for their colleagues in work and say to their boss, no, it's not fair that you're going to change my rota an hour before I'm supposed to come in to the shift, or you telling me like a day in advance when I'm working tomorrow. And it's basically just for people to say that things aren't fair in work and that they want to do something about it. But a lot of people obviously don't know what trade unions are, so they're not joining trade unions because they don't understand it. So what the Better Than Zero campaign does is we use flash mobs and stunts and lots of different kind of creative campaigning methods that have partly come from the Fight for 15 campaign in America, which is the big campaign about fast food rights workers, where they go outside McDonald's and they have huge protests about trying to get some sort of fair or minimum wage for people. And what we've done here is target G1, which is the biggest hospitality employer in Scotland, Stephen King. You've probably all been in some of his establishments or worked in them, because most people in Glasgow have worked for G1 at some point in their lives. I certainly have. And we basically go inside or outside any of the venues and create a big fuss. And by doing that, we have songs and choirs and people jumping up and down talking about the fact that he doesn't pay the minimum wage sometimes because they take off from your pay the cost of your uniform. Now, G1, as the biggest hospitality employer in Scotland, is also partly funded by the Scottish Government in a sense, because they get an Investors in People award and they get money from the Scottish Government for training young people. And when they train them, they also take off the wages from them for that training or don't pay them for that training. So this whole system of work basically is absolutely inherent within our governmental system at the moment as well, which is why we have to tackle something as symbolic as G1. Now, the Better Than Zero campaign is basically run by young activists themselves. It's not the same as a normal trade union campaign where it's, people in suits going in to have negotiations with management and have meetings with management about terms and conditions, etc. It is just for young people to do it themselves, basically. If they've got an employer that they want to tackle, whether it's their own workplace or somebody else's, one of their friends' workplaces, because obviously people don't necessarily feel confident enough to directly target their own workplace, then we go and we help them. We help them organise something inside or outside the workplace, and it gets media attention. And obviously these people, Stefan King, don't like this. Stefan King in fact said, if anybody from the Better Than Zero campaign contacts you, please just tell them that you really enjoy working here. So obviously it does have some kind of effect. One of our big successes was Las Iguanas in town, the Mexican restaurant. You've probably heard about the kind of taxation on tips that people have. So staff are charged like 10% of their wages are taken off them in order to pay the admin fees of credit cards. So there's basically a tax on all of their tips. So Change.org had a petition they set up 1 week about Las Iguanas and about how unfair that was and how they had to change it. The Better Than Zero campaign on the Saturday went into Las Iguanas in Glasgow in the city centre and pretended that we were having a meal, etc. And 3 or 4 young workers stood up and started talking about this whole taxation tipping policy and telling the customers what the company was actually doing. Now on the Monday, Las Iguanas changed the whole policy right throughout the country from that, because they were scared that it was going to start having some sort of knock-on effect, obviously, to their profits. Now the point of that is that it empowers people to do these things. It empowers the young workers themselves to get up and actually have the confidence to do these things and to organise these things by themselves. It shows them that things actually can change, that there is some sort of alternative to that. Now, in Scotland right now, we've got 78,000 people on 0 hours contracts. That's up 21% across the whole of the UK since last year. Now, what that means is not just in terms of not knowing how many hours you're going to get, but the actual knock-on effect of your whole life becoming precarious then. Because you can't rent a house if you're on a 0 hours contract without a guarantor now. You can't rent in a private landlord setting. You're certainly not going to get a mortgage even if you were thinking of doing that anyway. And it has this massive impact on people's actual family and friendship relationships then. We've had so many people coming to us, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, coming to us saying that they are basically just so depressed because they're feeling very, very isolated because they're on a 0 hours contract. Now that might sound like why they're depressed because of 0 hours, but it means that they're basically sitting at home not knowing when they're supposed to be working, not knowing how much money they're going to get, and they're not going out socialising with their friends and with their family. So this has a huge, huge societal impact as well. And that's kind of what I want to talk about in terms of, I suppose in terms of the campaign, but in terms of the actual purpose behind the campaign as well, based on what Danny and Jim were talking about. Because the other aspect of 0 hours contracts is that it's massively discriminatory, not just to young workers, but to women workers as well. And it's not just discriminatory in terms of who is actually on 0 hours contracts. We know that it's majority young people, majority women, across various different sectors. But it's actually what happens when you're in the workplace then, in terms of discrimination. So we've had a plethora, hundreds of different stories, but just to kind of outline a few of them for you. We've had one woman who's 18 or 19 who works in a casino, and in the casino she's on a 0 hours contract, paid minimum wage obviously, hardly gets any tips, etc, etc. Now in a casino they're obviously told to, you know, dress very nicely with tiny little short skirts on and get your boobs out, etc. Because that's what the customers like. So one day she's working behind the bar and a regular customer who's in all the time, spends thousands of pounds in the casino, is basically feeling her up behind the bar. So she goes to the bouncers, she goes to the manager and says, this guy needs to be removed, like I'm essentially being sexually assaulted at my work. And they say no, because he spends so much money here all the time. Now, because she's on a 0 hours contract, because she's on a minimum wage, she feels completely powerless to do anything about it. Because she knows that, and it is the truth, there's 100 other people waiting for her job because of the situation in the country right now. We've also got loads of stories of women being told that they have to actually dress a certain way. There was one in Ayrshire recently who just won an employment tribunal award for it because the employer had told her to wear a shorter dress, more makeup, because that's what the customers all wanted. Now, because she's on 0 hours again, it's that level of discrimination that people are facing in the workplace that means that they feel so powerless. And it's that the importance of this campaign is to give people back a bit of power and show that we actually can do something to change things in work. Just in terms of what Jim was saying about automation, I think that the importance of this campaign for that aspect is about that challenge and power, because it's all about workplace democracy. Right now, most people in this room probably feel that they have absolutely no say in what happens in their workplace, in terms of decision making, in terms of what happens to them at work, what happens to any of their friends at work. And if you can actually get together a collective of people, whether it's in a union or whether it's in some sort of campaign, and try to do things a bit differently, then it shows people that actually together they can make some sort of change. Now, if that doesn't happen right now in these precarious industries, then like what Jim was saying, these jobs are going to be gone, but people won't have that place to come together and actually realise that they do have some sort of power in society. Now, by 2050, it looks like 33% of all jobs in Scotland will be gone due to automation in some shape or form. 33% of the workforce, basically, is on those low-paid, low-skilled jobs. That means 33% of people in Scotland no longer feel that they have any part in society, no longer feel part of a collective, no longer feel that they have some sort of massive say in it. So Better Than Zero doesn't really have a particular policy about basic income or citizens' income, or like I said earlier, about anything to do with the robotic revolution, because that seems to be too visionary for the trade union movement at the moment. But I think the importance of it is being involved in some sort of campaign that people actually feel like A, they're changing something, B, their voices are actually being heard in the mainstream media, in the actual wider societal movement, and they're not just being heard, but they're actually managing to change things in the workplace and for their lives. Because if we don't change what's happening in the workplace right now, then it has this massive knock-on effect. So the discrimination that I was talking about in terms of these young women, the other aspect of that obviously is being paid for transport home isn't paid after working in bars and clubs, etc. So the level of sexual assaults and rapes even of young women who are coming home from these minimum wage jobs is massive, like particularly actually from G1 places as well. And it's that knock-on effect in the whole of the rest of society that we see. Like obviously we've got Trump's comments this week, Ched Evans' rape case this week as well. And it's how do these things happen? How do these things become normalised in society? And they become normalised through people actually experiencing this on a lower level, or on the same level really, every single day, even in their workplace. So we have to start looking at, but what is it we can actually do together about that? And that's the importance of the trade union movement and of the Better Than Zero campaign. I've kind of just told you a lot of my thoughts basically. It's not necessarily anything to do with Better Than Zero. But yeah, what we do is young people come together, they make up their own campaign plans, they make up their own organisational activities, and we educate each other. We educate each other about employment rights, about what's actually happening outside in different workplaces, and actually try to have some sort of strategy about how to tackle these things. And I think that that's really important, that there is that space, that we've got to do that right now. And many other different, the rest of the labour movement in Britain basically doesn't actually have that space for young people who are not being forced into just signing a recruitment form and paying dues just to become a member of a union and then left to kind of, you know, deal with things themselves. This is actually about people taking this kind of power back for themselves. I'll probably just leave it there and you can ask me questions about what we do, because that's easier.
I don't know. Well, yeah, no, we can take 2 or 3 questions.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.